think it's part of this podcast as well, is I'm trying to just, show that people do things in different ways. You don't need to go down the Amazon, the Deloitte, the EY. It's not a bad thing to do. Absolutely look at those, but there's other things out there and there's other things that you can do.
Yeah, I think that's my point from earlier. That sort of, the travelator of, you join the army, of course you want to be a regimental captain, then you want to be an OC, and of course you want to come back and command a regiment, and then you want to go and be a brigade commander. And if you don't want to do that, you're looked at strangely.
Yeah.
There's that. Why wouldn't you want to do that? And I think, like you say, there is no singular path. I think it's about just putting yourself out there and having a bit of confidence and ambition, and not every decision is going to pan out. Not every job is going to be the perfect job.
No. Welcome to Beyond Service Podcast, the podcast where we speak to military veterans who've made the transition from military to civilian life. I'm really excited this week to speak to Aaron Pendlebury, who had a 12-year career in the Royal Logistics Corps, and he made the transition successfully into the HR space. Great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you. Great to be here, Aaron.
Good. So always like to start, Aaron, I suppose just at the start, really, kind of what were the reasons, kind of what made you look at joining the military? I know we spoke previously and you joined quite young, but kind of what got you to that space and what was the reason behind that?
Yeah, well, I don't know whether it's the right phrase, lack of ambition, but I didn't know what else I was going to do. I joined through a scheme which doesn't exist anymore. It's through Welbeck College, and there was a scheme called DETUS, which is Defence Educational Technical Undergraduate Scheme. It's a very complicated way of saying
Fancy.
The army sort of sponsored you to join the army, to join the technical course, and ultimately I did all the sort of normal stuff you do as a boy and joined army cadets and thought it was great. And one of the sort of recruiting sergeants at the time gave me a VHS, shows how long ago it was, and a pamphlet.
I still think they're doing that now.
Yeah, it didn't have a remote and a wire, so it was like more modern than that. It was basically a promotional video for this scheme and college. And Welbeck was essentially a sixth form college where you went and did your A-levels, and then you went on to university sponsored by the army. And my parents saw that it was fully funded, so off I went. So I sort of signed up really to do that scheme, and was very keen on the army. Sort of hadn't really sort of thought about doing anything particularly different. Journalism maybe, but that was it. So sort of 15, 16 went and did an abridged version of the Army Officer Section Board, and then was on the sort of conveyor belt to Sandhurst.
Nice.
5 or 6 years later.
Wow. So you went to university before Sandhurst?
Yeah. So I did 2 years at Welbeck, where I got my A-levels, then went to university for 3 years, and then straight to Sandhurst after that.
Nice.
For the year-long vlog.
The joy that is Sandhurst, yeah. And I think, again, I don't know, I didn't do that route myself, but you have to go down a more technical route. There's less choice, is that right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not an academic by any stretch of the imagination, but the aim of the scheme was to get you into the engineers, the logistics, signals, and I was terrible at maths, so I had very few options. But actually, much like anybody that goes to Sandhurst, you go through your sort of selection process, and I sort of had offers to join either the engineers or logistics. And the logistics had just a better fit. People I met were more like me and felt like it was a good place to go, and that was it. That was choice done.
Nice. Well, I mean, it's interesting. I think I've spoken to various people from various services on this podcast, but mainly army. Quite a lot of infantry, because mainly people I knew from my regiment. But it's interesting to speak to someone who's gone down a different route than that, because in some ways, I think like if you go down more a technical route, potentially you might get qualifications that can align to civilian street and that sort of thing. But that's the way I looked at it. I was like, if you're in the engineers or logistics, it's easy. You just go and do that job, or the signals or whatever. You'll get a job. But actually, when speaking to quite a few people around that, they're like, yes, it's good in a way if that's what you want to do. But it can almost pigeonhole you to a point of like, I've done that in the army, or I don't want to do that in the civilian life. So it's kind of a two-sworded kind of two-edged sword almost.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, like you say, there's that get a trade, and then at least you've got something that you can fall back on when you leave, and perhaps slightly more apt, I guess, if you're a soldier versus an officer, because I guess you don't necessarily get the same level of technical qualification that you might do as a soldier. But I mean, I certainly went, my first job process that I went through when I left was in logistics for Amazon. to run basically a depot, a warehouse, distribution warehouse close to home, which would have been great. But ultimately didn't get that one. And in many ways, it's probably a good thing, because I then pivoted away thinking, well, do I really want to do logistics? And I was going for a job that sounded great, and actually the person who was the incumbent was an ex-RLC, a friend of mine. He's like, mate, you should come and do this. And, and obviously Amazon would have been a great company to, sort of from a CV perspective, which I'm sure we'll come on to. But ultimately, I don't think my heart was ever really to be a logistician for the next 30 years.
No.
But yeah, so I can see how people fall into that trap. But yeah, thankfully I wriggled out of it.
Avoided it, yeah. So in terms of then, so obviously you go through Sandhurst and do your officer training. Again, it sounds like I've not been in the army, but like people who've been in the army know that you kind of know you're part of the army, and then you don't really understand the rest of it. But what happens in terms of logistics? Did you go down a specific trade route? Was there some like specialism that you're in? What was your focus?
No, I mean, as an officer, you don't trade in the same way you think you are an officer, and that is your trade, much like anywhere else.
Yeah.
But what you can do, and what I was fortunate enough to be able to, through the sort of not board selection, either sort of role selection process and your job postings, I always got my first choice, which was really lucky.
Good.
But you can pick to go to the regiments that have certain specialisms. So you could go be an air dispatch and do the sort of airborne type stuff, or you can go and be a petroleum operator, or you could go down the sort of chefing route. But for me, I just wanted to be in that, the bit that was closest to the armies, and do the actual what's called close support logistics. So my first three postings were all in close support logistic units, doing that immediate sort of logistical support to combat units.
Yeah, nice.
So yeah,
good. And then so you kind of did, I suppose, 12 years. What was it? How did that all play out then? Was it time of regimental duty? And
yeah. So yeah, my first 8 years was all regimental duty, and it's funny when I speak to sort of friends who haven't been in the army, and I was really lucky because as I was going through the sort of army education system, that was when 9/11 happened, and obviously, the sort of course of everybody's military career changed, and it was almost like, well, you're joining an army at the time where we're at war. So, in some ways, that was lucky for a career where you actually go to deploy on operations and do all the stuff that you join the army for. So, yeah, my first 3 sort of rotations through regimental duty were all on the training cycle, and 3 deployments to Afghanistan. So in various different roles, so you get sort of more senior as a troop commander the first time, and then as a squadron captain, and then as I went as an I-Star officer on my last one. So yeah, did all the fun regimental duty things, ended up as the regimental ops officer. So that's sort of senior captain for my 7th and 8th year, and then lucky enough to promote to major, and then was appointed at staff. Which is the second part of your.
If you know, you know.
Yeah, if you know, you know. And I mean, I think, to be honest, I sort of give staff a bad press, but actually, I think it's kind of depends where you get sent. And I was probably given the worst job. Obviously easy to say that, but I think going as a sort of acting major, waiting to go on to ICSCL, being sent to army headquarters, where you are. You have to be a colonel to be invited to the meeting. I found myself doing quite a lot of boring work. Wasn't really involved in anything significant or interesting. That was my first sort of experience, having done 8 years of really cool stuff. Yeah. And now all of a sudden I'm sat in Blenheim, army headquarters behind a laptop, shuffling PowerPoints. And I thought, is this what staff is really about? Maybe there's something a little bit more to life outside the army, having joined up, so long ago. That I think was probably for me the tipping point to go, maybe there's something else outside of the army.
Yeah, it's a completely different world, isn't it? Completely different. I did mainly regimental duty and then some training stuff, but yeah, when I went to army headquarters, I didn't realize there was that many colonels in the army. You kind of think a lieutenant colonel at battalion, you're like, wow, that's like
it's exactly
senior, and then they're just everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, don't get me wrong. I then went on and I did another staff job post ICSCL but that was in my sort of death throes of time in the army, and and that was at regional command, and I was a plans officer there, and some really good, interesting work around the home base that was being done, and quite interesting. Like you think from a business perspective, like sort of relate it to what we're doing now. There's some really good, interesting things that we could be doing. But ultimately, I think when you look at then your army career, it's sort of that's such an alien part of the army to what you join up for that you know, and you get older and you look outside and you see there's opportunity to be had, and you make the decision to go.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
some do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we talked about it before as well. You know, it is difficult because you kind of I was getting to the same spot where I'm going to be strapped to a desk now. You
Yeah.
know, I'm probably not going to see a soldier for the next like 5 years. You know, and it's like I could do that in London. You know, like in civilian world and actually run my own life. So I'm starting to get a flavor of you coming to the end of your career, but you were, I think, like me, in a lucky position where you could make that call on kind of ending your career and choosing to do something different. But where's your headspace at that time? How are you feeling about things, the army? Be good to hear how you kind of felt about that whole transition process that you went through. And then what were you kind of thinking about you're going to do next? Where was your head at that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was really excited for it. You
Mm,
know, I think a lot of people perhaps are nervous. They don't know where they're going to land, what's going to happen. But I think having basically signed the dotted line at 15, I was like, there has to be something out there. And sort of knew I was at risk of becoming one of these institutionalized people. So it wasn't a daunting experience. And we were chatting earlier, I was quite open about the fact that I was leaving. You know, so I didn't sort of just wake up one morning and go, I'm done, click the button, I'm off.
Yeah.
I'd been sort of actively thinking about it and being sort of talking to friends about leaving for at least 6 months, 12 months before I actually resigned. So in some ways it wasn't a momentous feeling. I mean, I did the sort of 7 clicks to freedom and, you know, videoed it so I could send it around to my mates. Just a bit of a laugh. Yeah, you'll be here soon. So I was excited, but it is also quite daunting in the fact that, you know, as you know, you have a 12-month notice period and you basically commit to leaving with no idea what's coming next. So, but I think it then just came down to preparation and, you know, I spent a fair amount of time in the lead up thinking about, well, what do I actually want to do? Because obviously, you know, the trap is, well, you just want to be a project manager, don't you? Because that's what all our bosses are good at. You know, so, and I'd say I didn't necessarily dodge everything, and I did do my BMP course that cost exactly £2,000 in line with your LCAS credits.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think I just felt like, well, that's a bit of a tick box exercise. Didn't really know what I should be using the funding for. But then sort of just started thinking, well, what's out there? Where could you work? And ultimately, I didn't really know. I just thought, you know, there was a number of employers, you know, like Barclays and EY where I ended up that had sort of veteran-friendly recruitment processes. And like I said, I'd been through the Amazon process and didn't quite make it. And I mean, actually, I applied for a job at GlaxoSmithKline, which was really strange. My first interview was a Zoom interview. Well, I thought it was going to be a Zoom interview, but it was a video interview where there was nobody else on the other side.
So you had to record a video for it. Oh, really?
Flashed up on the screen, and then they said, right, you've now got 3 minutes to answer it, and the question disappeared, and then you just had to sort of speak into this void, and you know, you don't have any sort of rapport with the person you're speaking to thinks you're giving a good answer or not. So that was quite strange.
Yeah.
But yeah, really, I sort of, like I said, I didn't necessarily actively think I was going to have a career in HR, but I joined EY in a HR based team, and yeah, that was, I guess, the springboard for the following 7, 8 years.
Nice. Yeah, do you know what? I think I hope it doesn't come across in this podcast. It probably does. That I'm bad mouthing any project management or kind of going to these big four, because I did these. Actually, I went to Deloitte, you know, and what I didn't do was what you sound like you did, and then actually think about what I wanted to do. I just thought I just need to get a job in London.
Yeah.
Deloitte, I don't really know what they do, but they sound good. Let's go there. So, but yeah, I think there genuinely is a place for ex-military doing project management. Like absolutely is. It just didn't suit me. I'm not a real detail-oriented person, and it just didn't suit me. So it's the cookie-cutter approach to it that I don't like, where it's like, oh, you're an army officer, or you're a senior, you know, NCO, like, you know, you'd be great at health and safety, like you'd be great at project management. Yeah. And it's just, I just don't like that. It's because it's not treating people as individuals. It's difficult. I get that. The funding for people leaving, etc., is hard. But and again, and I don't want to badmouth these big organizations where there is military transition programs, because I think they're also great. Because like what's ended up with yourself, or myself and other colleagues is you may not necessarily stay at that big organization, but it might gives you a good military friendly landing zone where
Yeah.
you can go in, you can make some mistakes because these businesses are big enough for you to, if you make a mistake, it's not going to, ruin EY's
Yeah.
reputation. You can kind of get away with things. You can learn. You speak to a lot of different clients, meet different businesses, meet different people, kind of civilianize yourself a little
Yeah.
bit. And then it might shape what you don't want to do. That also might shape, and it looks like it shaped where you want to go.
Yeah, I think, like I said, I don't think it's a bad thing to say about those organisations, that have these veteran-friendly routes, because, like you say, it gives you great opportunity, and actually, because they are well-trodden paths, you have less of the obstacle of trying to translate your experience, because they know that. In my interview process for the team that I ended up joining, that one of the interviewers, her husband was in the military, so she fundamentally kind of understood where I was coming from. And also, those, you say, EY is massive. There are 1,000 different departments you could join, and part of my process was was I going to be a client-facing person? Did I want to be a consultant? Didn't really know what that meant. Didn't feel like that was the sort of job that I could naturally transition into. So, and I guess you're probably slightly cliche, but being in the sort of support services in the army, that was kind of an area that I felt I had affinity to. So a role that was where you're supporting the employees of a business felt like a place where I could find a fit. So that's ultimately why I ended up, I guess, in the team that I joined. This sort of it was like a talent support. They call it resource management, but basically you go in and you help people to get the roles they need, get the work they need to build their experience. It's kind of like a talent development type role, and that felt like it had affinities to being sort of I guess the sort of operational planning side of the force equipment table and troops at readiness. So like, how do you make sure you've got the right people doing the right job? So there's lots of sort of things that kind of translated and made sense. So
it was like Glasgow, but basically
EY. It's basically Glasgow for EY, yeah. But we don't say lies.
You're actually trying to help you.
Actually genuinely trying to help people, not just fill jobs. But so that was just the first job, and like I say, a great opportunity with a great company. But ultimately, it was also I knew, and I'm sure most people do, that their first job out of the army is never going to be your only job.
No.
And the biggest challenge wasn't the work; it was, and it would not that I found it difficult, but it was the culture shock, the complete change of environment that you have come from, and then you're now in this corporate commercial environment working with people that have very different sort of motivations and have different views on teamwork and what it means to work together. And I found that quite strange, and didn't want to stay there for long.
No. But you're right. It's good to have that kind of that spot where you can go in, and there is a network in there internally of ex-military, and I found that Deloitte it's obviously very similar to EY, but that was one of the things I found challenging. Was like, I thought I'd got a job when I joined Deloitte, but actually you get in there and then you've got to find work to get onto, which is like people like yourself who are involved in that. It's like, who do I speak? Like, why have I not got just a job to go to now? It's like, no, you've got to get yourself on a project now. So that was an interesting space to be in. But we'll kind of move on to like how you kind of now then moved into more HR and that sort of thing. And I think you obviously use the experience you got at EY in a really positive way. But I do find it strange. And there definitely are people out there who are ex-military in HR, but I think it really is a natural spot for ex-military to go into, because the military is so people focused. Like, everything we do is all about the people. Like, it's even as a young platoon commander or troop commander, you're getting people on training. You're making sure you're doing your pastoral care. There's coaching, there's development. There's it's all very then in the infantry you've got in the adjutant's role, which is very much a HR role, discipline and all that sort of stuff. So I feel like there's a natural fit there, but a lot of people don't necessarily go down that route. And but yeah, it'd be good to hear your thoughts on that, and I suppose what you felt how you felt the transition was in terms of how it fit with your previous experience, and kind of why you ended up going that route.
No, I think the sort of lead into that is exactly how I saw it, is that when I looked at myself like as a technical professional, what had I done? What was I good at? And obviously you do lots of sort of leadership training. I was a regimental training officer, so I had that sort of L&D bin that you could sort of lean on. But ultimately, you're in this people-focused leadership role, and you're managing and supporting teams, and you're in sort of endlessly on training cycles in the army. So when I thought, well, what's my technical skill set? It was, okay, yeah, I can do operational planning and management of projects, but that is applicable to any job you go in. Any job you could possibly find, particularly if you want to get into those management positions, you're going to be doing some form of project management at some point. So, that's why I didn't sort of go, well, that must be a career. I sort of thought, well, that's just a sort of capability I have. It's not my career sort of stream. And then I just think very much that people angle is just liked working to support people. So I think that's where the affinity for HR came from. I think the challenge, and certainly I faced this myself when applying for HR roles, is you don't have the career profile of people that have spent their career in HR. So I'm sure if you're in the AGC, which we touched on earlier, you will have been in personnel-based roles and therefore probably transition into a HR career a lot easier than others. But my CV was, operational logistics management, and now all of a sudden I want to join a HR stream, and you're going up against candidates who have spent 15 years as HR people. So, I'd often get, you're a really interesting candidate, but you're coming up against people who have just different experience. So it was sort of fighting to find the jobs. And then I guess really it was a bit of persistence and finding a job through network. Like I haven't got any job by just throwing a CV on a portal. It's all been by getting somebody on the phone. So I left EY. I'm quite fortunate. I literally had to walk about 300 meters up Ball London Place to a law firm where I'd made a contact with somebody there, sort of offered saw a role they were applying, said, could we have a coffee? They'd just filled the role, no problems. A few months later, hadn't been filled. Do you want to grab a coffee? Went for a coffee, and it was like a natural extension of what I was doing already at EY, but just with an opportunity to do it in a new space where it was a sort of emerging capability. They wanted someone who could almost act in that role, and there was room for development as well.
Okay.
But it was still within that HR space, and I very quickly started to figure out that if I wanted to move into a role like I have now, I needed to build my HR experience and prove a degree of credibility rather than just rely on slick talking it. So I just invested time in it. I got involved in all the projects I could. I started doing my CIPD, which is the Chartered Institute of Professional Development or People Development qualifications. I'm now a fellow of that group. So you start to build that experience. So now when I go for an interview or apply for roles, my CV starts with lots of people stuff. And the army bit is now a never diminishing part of what my CV looks like. But I just think for me, I just focused on it. I knew that's where I enjoyed working, and you didn't need a first from Cambridge in astrophysics to get there.
There's so many good things you put out there, and I think the bit that got me at the start there was like it's around the capability piece and you may not have HR director this on your CV for the last 20 years, but actually you can prove like, well, yeah, I can do project management, I can do people, I can do this and that. I've worked on training and L&D, and I've got these capabilities and me as a person, I can manage challenging, difficult situations. I can work with lots of people. I can bring people on that journey. I can kind of build trust and build teams and
manage specialists.
Yeah, exactly.
I in my team, I have now people who are recruitment specialists, L&D specialists, payroll specialists, benefit specialists. That's not my background or bread and butter, but I can turn my mind to the conversation. I can work with them to deliver what we need. When it comes down to the technical delivery of payroll.
Yeah. You should not be able to that.
Look at not if you want to get paid on time. But I think it's around not necessarily convincing, but showing people that the role that you're there to do is not to necessarily be the technical specialist in every aspect. I remember where I am now, there was a question around, my experience of employment law, going to be the head of HR for a business, you do need to know your stuff. And I mean, I did a employment law academy recently, which I passed, which is all great. So, sort of continuing that professional development, but through the interview process, also I'm meeting with employment lawyers because I now work at a law firm, and that they rightly challenged and said, well, what's your employment law experience like? And one of the other employment lawyers said, well, we're that expert. We're not asking Aaron to come in and be our employment law expert. We're asking him to come in and lead the HR function.
Yeah, exactly.
So, there's ways to get to jobs that don't necessarily mean you have to necessarily be the technical expert in every aspect.
No, 100%. And even if you were going in as head of HR without a military background, you've been doing that since uni or whatever, like you wouldn't be a specialist in that law, in that type of law anyway. You would always leverage that specialism from lawyers. But so that, I get that, but I think that's I think you're right, because quite often I think you can get specialists who then try and become managers and it doesn't pan out because they're specialists and they're good at a specific niche and they're good at delivering on something. And I've seen that in, the number of years I've been in recruitment now, a lot of amazing recruiters, particularly on the agency side, who then tried to become managers. It just didn't work. Right? Because they don't have that skill set. They haven't had the training, the development, and it's such a different skill to have that military people have in abundance, because from day one, that's what it's drilled into you. The motto of Sanders is serve to lead. And
Absolutely.
it's all about the people. It's all about, and that gets baked into you and you learn how to lead and manage, and then you're tested in a very difficult way. I think that's such a underrated skill set and so difficult to get that, it's because, and you see it when people who have not got that background suddenly try and manage or suddenly try and lead, and it doesn't work.
No, 100%. I think I was actually talking to my friend this morning whilst we were on the way into London. We had a coffee and we're talking about, there's that interview question, do you work best on your own or in a team? And everyone always gives well, I can work both. Whereas for me, fundamentally, you have to be in a team. Those standalone roles are just not for me. I don't enjoy them. I like having a team, and I've been fortunate enough to work with some great firms and have senior roles, but they've always had a leadership aspect to them. That's what I love to do. So I think, like you say, it's not. I wouldn't say it's an underrated skill set for the military. I think people kind of look to you because you have that part of you that, like you say, a specialist won't necessarily have developed. And certainly one of the things that we talk about a lot in law firms, and currently where I am now is, particularly for our lawyers, for example, is they spend years being technically brilliant at delivering legal services, and they promote, year on year, they go up the experience chain, and then at some point they become a partner. And now all of a sudden they are owners of the business. They have to manage profitability, they have to manage clients, they have to manage their teams, they have to do performance management, and it's this huge culture shock because they've never had to do it for the past 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. They've just done the specialist job, and now they have this huge remit of responsibility which they've not necessarily been prepared for. So part of what I'm doing now is putting support in so that when they get there, they are absolutely trained. And like we were saying earlier, in terms of the role I'm doing now, it's not necessarily there to deliver lots of technical delivery. Of course, that's what my team does on a day-to-day basis. But it's also to take the business on that transformational journey around what it is to be a manager and a leader in the business. And not that I'm the expert on it, but can certainly point at things that I think work and don't work, and hopefully bring the business forward.
And I think one of the other things mentioned there, which I think is, I don't think people who are leaving the military put enough thought or enough planning or enough kind of consideration around this, is like reskilling yourself. Like you've moved away from the logistics side of things and you've made that conscious decision. But when you do, it's easy to say, oh, I'd like to go and do HR, but actually, what are the steps that you need to take to do that? And that can be applied to any, whether you want to go and be a landscape gardener or a mechanic or whatever. You have to be prepared that you might have to take a step back, whether that's in salary, whether that's in seniority, and you might have to go back to school. You might have to get your qualifications, nights, whatever that might be, if it's a degree. So that has to shape, I think, into that whole picture of when you're doing your planning to when you leave the military. It's like, okay, I want to do this. If you want to do it enough, are you prepared to to do the work and potentially take the hit in salary, etc., etc.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. I'd say there's two things. I think the one thing I was really disappointed to hear when I was going through, the career transition workshops and sitting in a room with the people that are leaving, was that terminology, that sort of pervasive. Well, you're going to have to take a salary cut, and it was almost like there was this expectation that was what you had to do, and I was like, why? Be ambitious. You know what you're worth, and go out and get it. Don't you? If you start with the I'm going to have to go down a level, and I'm going to have to, then guess what? That's where you'll end up. And I felt it was a bit of a failing of the sort of workshops that was the pervasive view. Whereas I was like, no, I want to step up. I want to go out and find this job. I want, this is what I think I want to earn. This is what I think where my value is. And it was surprising how many people were sort of talking themselves down. I think that confidence and ambition point was really helped me go, well, I'm going to go for this.
Yeah.
I'm going to aim high, and if I fall a few rungs short, fine, I'll still be okay.
Yeah.
And then in terms of, like you say, the preparation, it was, sort of, I don't hesitate to say it, but I had a 5-year plan. This is where I want to be. This is how I think I'm going to get there. This is the education that I want to do. This is the jobs I think I need to get. Some of the markets you hit, some of them you don't. But if I'd have left with just sort of thinking, well, I'll just roll the dice here and end up and go where it goes, maybe I'll be doing something completely different, and I don't know, be equally as happy. But I think having a bit of a focus and a plan to, just like you say, kind of get you on a path, certainly has helped me. But I'm not necessarily that's good for everyone.
No. How did you speak to people in this industry? Is it just something you came up with yourself? You did some research. How did you go about? Because I think that's a really important bit, having that plan. And I like the 5-year plan thing.
Yeah.
It's a good idea, and to think where you're going to get to. But what did anyone help you with that? Did you network around that? What was?
Yeah, I mean, I think networking is one of those really interesting things. Is that you hear that a lot, don't you? When you're leaving, you got to network, and you go, well, what does that mean? Because if you've spent 16 years or 12 in my case in the army, you don't have a network. And because I joined at 15, and my network is everybody around me, nobody around me is going to get me a job anywhere. So I found it was often a quick throwaway. I just got to get good at networking. And so I thought, well, what does that mean? There are certain resources out there which are really helpful. Like there's the list, the sort of officer group where there's spreadsheets full of people who'd be willing to speak to you. But I just worked on the approach of, LinkedIn is a great tool, but you have to use it. You have to sort of just be bold enough to drop somebody a message, and someone might have a coffee with you, somebody might not. Reach out to people that you can see are veterans, that are in places where you might be interested in. I think you just got to start having conversations and speak to people about their experience and what tidbits of advice you can get. Because obviously, much like when you're in the army, everyone assumes that this is the path, and people give you their story and how they did something that might not necessarily apply to you. And then I was just quite relentless about connecting with people in the jobs that I was interested to do, because I think that's where you start to build an understanding of, well, what's this business like? What's the job like? What do you actually do? And then I just didn't rely on recruiters. I was like, if I could see a job that I was interested in, I would try and find who the manager for that job was. Go on the website, go on LinkedIn, and then drop them an email and say, "Seen you're hiring, it'd be great to have a coffee." And you have to just put the effort in and put yourself out there. Some people will ignore you, some people will stand you up, constantly reschedule, but you have to kind of put that effort into networking yourself. It's not just a build 1,000 connections on LinkedIn and do nothing with them. So I think that was really helpful. And then just speaking to my friends who I've had, since school that didn't join the army, and what are they doing, and what do they like, and what's the city like, and you sort of just start to build a picture of where you think you can fit.
That's really, I think that's useful. I think people do try and rely on just purely the ex-military network, which is great, and that's absolutely a protocol. There's lots of people who've left, and there's lots of people who've served and what have you. But I think it's really useful. And you're the second person that said it to me about speaking to friends who were never in the military, and like, what do they do, and what's their jobs like? And I actually did that, and that's how I ended up in recruitment, because I had a friend who'd ended up starting her own recruitment firm, and I met her for a coffee and had a conversation. I thought, so you get people jobs. That's good. I think I could do that.
It's mine.
You're driving a Porsche. Okay, I'm in. But no, it's just good to understand, because And I think this part of this podcast as well is I'm trying to just, show that there's people do things in different ways. You don't need to go down the Amazon, the Deloitte, the
Yeah.
UI. It's not a bad thing to do. Absolutely look at those. But there's other things out there and there's other things that you can do.
Yeah, I think that's my point from earlier. That sort of,
Mm.
the travelator of, you join the army. Of course, you want to be a regimental captain. Then you want to be an OC, and of course, you want to come back and command a regiment, and then you want to go and be a brigade commander. And if you don't want to do that, you're looked at strangely.
Yeah.
There's that. Why wouldn't you want to do that? And I think, like say, there is no singular path. And I think you've just got to have. I think it's about just putting yourself out there and having a bit of confidence and ambition, and not every decision is going to pan out. Not every job is going to be the perfect job.
No.
Like EY, like I said, was great for me, but very quickly realised that I didn't want to stay in that business. Just the culture was so alien. The work was okay. The room for progression was quite limited. So I was like, okay, time to move. And I think, I resigned after 9 months, like, which you maybe think, well, you haven't done enough time there yet. And it's like, just recognised early that wasn't what I wanted to do. And I think be confident, I think, particularly for officers where you post every 2 years, moving's not that alien.
No, exactly. Yeah. It's like you kind of get itchy feet, don't you?
Yeah. Well, it was one of those interview questions I had, which was, well, how are you going to find it starting a new job? And I'm like, well, I've done that every 2 years. So I'm just coming and meet the new team, like that's pretty normal to me. I was like, oh yeah, okay, fine.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you just got to prepare to fail.
Yeah.
But and don't take that as too much of a
Exactly.
knockback. You don't win every interview, you don't get every phone call,
No, you
but you've got to
don't.
start somewhere.
Definitely. And you're right. I think that bit about that first job is be prepared that the majority, I actually struggle to think of anybody I know that's left who stayed in that
Yeah,
first job, to be honest. So it can be a good stepping stone, get some good experience from it, but it might even just be like, for yourself, this is not what I want to do.
Yeah.
And that's good to know, because
Yeah.
then you won't, you kind of that's scratched off. I can go and do something
It'd be a
else.
good bit of analysis to do, actually. How many people have stayed in their first job? I mean, I certainly say, for example, when I started at EY, there was a guy called Russ there who'd been there for about 13 years, and he'd left the army, and we were in the sort of same sort of department. He's since moved on and is now the head of the resourcing function for a big professional services firm, and they're doing great things. So, but yeah, it's not unusual that you might strike gold and find a place that you think you could build a career in. So
Yeah, and that's what you need to go into it with that mentality, don't you? Give it everything, but I don't think there's anything. And I think, there's kind of, people are like, I don't want to see it seem like I'm jumping around, etc. And it's like, to be honest, the civilian world has changed from that. People don't really care about that sort of stuff. If it's every single 5-6 months, maybe then there's an issue there. But if the first one doesn't work out, then don't. I often say that to people: don't rest on your laurels. If you realize it's not right and there's something else that you want to go and do, go and do that.
Yeah. Well, like say, well, they call it portfolio career now.
Yeah,
It's you don't have to stay somewhere for 10 years. You can move every couple of years. Like you say, you want to be a little bit careful, because if you're 2 foot loose, people might start to think it's you, not the job.
Exactly.
But also, I think these days with the ability to promote and progress, you almost in some ways have to move to get that next opportunity to act up. So I certainly wouldn't advise people not to move if they didn't feel it's right, but definitely caution around every year.
Not stay somewhere for a little bit. So we're coming to the end now, and this has been, there's some been really good bits to pull out of this, but if I called you up and I said, right, I'm leaving now, I'm getting out, I've done I don't even know, do they do the 7 clicks to freedom anymore? They probably do. I don't know. It's probably one now, isn't it? Yeah. But I'm done that now. Like, what's your top bits of advice that you think, right, I need to do to kind of make my transition successful, if you're going to kind of really kind of boil it down to?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, don't be shy about that you're leaving. I think you start. I mean, we said earlier on, lots of people were asking, but when I was open that I'm probably going to resign in a few months, everybody around me was like, "What are you doing? Where are you going?" Like it's surprising how many people are having the same thoughts, and there's comfort in that, and you can start to think, well, what are you thinking about? So just be open with the people that you're currently working with. I think just be confident in terms of there's plenty of opportunity out there. There is lots and lots of opportunity. You will find a job, so have confidence in that, and don't set your sights too low. Don't fall into that trap of, well, I have to take a pay cut and I'm going to have to go in at this level. Be ambitious. And I think really, and I'm sure this won't be a unique answer, is just really think about what you want to do. I didn't want to be a consultant. I wasn't going to go into something that was overly technical. I wanted to be in a people-related field. I wanted a job that gave me the ability to be a manager and lead teams. And then you start to find, well, what jobs fit that? You know, you might, you know, I've ended up in, you know, in HR in the legal sector. You know, if you'd have asked me on the day I resigned, what was I going to be doing in 7-8 years' time, that I would never have given you this answer.
No.
So I think, you know, don't sort of limit yourself to the conveyor belt answer of I must do X, Y, and Z. And then, like I say, as we touched upon, the networking point, it is real. It does help. But networking isn't just connecting on LinkedIn. You have to put yourself out there and speak. Networking is speaking with people you don't know. Yeah, go and make connections with people that might be able to help you. And most people are pretty good. They might not have anything that they can help you with, but they can connect you with someone else, or they'll give you some advice. But it's no point networking with the major or the captain or the sergeant next to you.
Yeah.
You need to connect with people that are already out there.
Absolutely. Great advice. Well, if people want to reach out to you, they're kind of seen this and they think, right, I think I want to get myself into HR or the legal sector or whatever, you know, is LinkedIn the best place to kind of?
Yeah, LinkedIn's great. Yeah, on there, and yeah, I'm very happy. I mean, I'd love to speak to people about careers into HR because I think it's such a great field. There is so much you can specialize. You know, I'm in a generalist role now, but there are you can get some excellent careers. There are really senior roles in every aspect of HR. So there's a breadth of opportunity. So you might think, what I want to join HR for isn't that, you know, you might have been infanteer and thinking, what am I going to do there?
Yeah.
You might love training. L&D is such an integral part of HR, and it's of growing importance as well. So, you know, there'd be something for everyone that I could sell you on. You know, here's why you should definitely have a career in HR. But yeah, happy to speak to anyone.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Bro, thanks, Ed.
Thanks.